Hi everyone, I'm here today to talk to you about all of the books that I read in October. There are about 20 books, I think, that I'm going to talk to you about today. A real mixed bag. Some books I really loved, some books I really didn't. And I was also on book deadline, which is why I haven't filmed this video up until now. I handed in my new book last week. So I'm playing catch up, and this is going to be probably a more casual wrap-up video than normal because of that. I would say it's also going to be a shorter one, but we all know that I talk a lot. So just know that I am filming this video with the intention of it being shorter than it probably ends up being. I had 4 DNFs last month, books that I did not finish, so maybe we should start there. The first one is one that I was really surprised not to love. I had such high hopes for it. It was one of my most anticipated releases for autumn, winter this year, and I know so many people have loved it, but you know, all books aren't for everybody, and that's absolutely fine. In this case, I'm talking about Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This one I read about half of, and there just wasn't enough in it to encourage me to keep reading. I found the characters very flat. I didn't really see or understand who they were in a nuanced way, and I didn't believe in the dialogue either. People kept on saying each other's names quite a lot, speaking in full sentences. It just wasn't particularly realistic, and it did also feel quite derivative of The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, which I also read last month and I'll speak about in a bit. When it was getting to the creepy bits of this haunted house, I was intrigued, just not enough for me to want to continue reading. And I think that there are books that explore this kind of horror in a better way, such as The Beauty by Alia Whiteley, which I enjoyed much more. So not for me, unfortunately. I think if you read more YA than I do, then you might get on with this better. I wasn't particularly sure who the audience was for, whether it was supposed to be adult or YA. I mean, a good book is a good book, and to me, it just didn't tick the criteria of things that I personally like, but I think if you read more YA, you're probably more likely to enjoy this book. A book that I did really like the writing style of, but DNF'd because of the content, is The Knife Drawer by Padrika Tarant. This one has been on my shelf for a really long time. I read her short story collection, Broken Things, maybe 5 years ago and really liked it. This is about a personified haunted house. So the spoons inside the house live and they eat things. At the beginning of this book, a wife murders her husband, and then the teaspoons consume him, and she goes into the room where she killed him and he's not there anymore. She's also got 2 young children, one of whom she really loves, one of whom she really doesn't. So it has a folktale, fairy tale feel to it that I really was fond of. However, the way this book talks about disability and disfigurement, I could not get past it. It was everywhere, really hammering these points home. So there are mice in this house, and they are inbred, as the novel says, and a lot of the mice are called the singing mice, and they are the disabled mice, and they are so evil that they just want to die. And one of these mice has albinism, and his mother thinks that he's a monster, and he does all of these awful things, and the other mice just want to attack him all the time. And as I said, it goes on and on and on, and I just wanted it to stop. So if you can get past things like that, then maybe this is for you, because the writing is wonderful. But for me, it was just such a red flag. I just had to give up on it. If you would like more videos about disfigurement and the representation of that in literature, I will link that in the description box down below. And then the next DNF was one I bought really recently, which is CJ Cooke's The Nesting. This is a book about a woman who takes somebody else's identity and she applies for a job in this person's name. So she's on the train and she hears this person who is sitting on the table opposite saying she's going to apply for this nannying job and she really wants it. But then her friend convinces her not to do it. And when she goes to the bathroom, she asks this woman to please look after her belongings. And when she goes to the bathroom, this woman who is really lost in life, she wants an excuse to escape, somewhere to go, some purpose. She copies her CV and applies for the job of nannying a family in Norway as if she was that person. She herself has no nannying experience, but when she applies for this job, she realizes that something is not quite right. The reason that I DNF this one is just because it's not the kind of book for me. It moves so quickly, and I could not get fully invested in that. I couldn't make myself believe everything that was happening because it just felt so over the top. If you enjoy more fast-paced things, then maybe you will really like this. I'm not saying that this is a bad book, it's just not for me. And I think if you enjoy Rosamund Lupton's writing, then you will really enjoy this. I have enjoyed one of her books, her first book, Sister. Her other books I haven't got on with as much for the same reasons as why I didn't get on with this one, actually, that they are fast-paced, that I did find them slightly unbelievable, and I just couldn't make myself get lost in that world. But if you are able to do that more than I am, then maybe this one is for you. It's definitely going to be really creepy, I think, and lots of scary things happening once they get to Norway and are in that forest. My final DNF was The Dollmaker by Nina Allan, and on paper this should have been something I loved. It's about a man who's obsessed with dolls. He collects them and he examines what makes us human, and that's an exploration of trauma that he's been through, and he's communicating with a woman who is also obsessed with dolls. And then between their chapters we get extracts from a book, a fictional one that's been created for this novel, a collection of fairy tales which explores those themes as well. So I mean, tick, 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 that all sounds like stuff I'm going to love, but the writing itself didn't intrigue me. It felt quite jarring. There were lots of things that pulled me out of the story. It's very Gothic, feels very old-fashioned, but everyone, for instance, has a mobile phone, and whenever that came up in the text I had to pause and think, wait, where are we? When is this set? It just felt quite bizarre, and it didn't feel like it was knitted together as well as it could have been. Again, though, I'm sure that other people will enjoy this. It just wasn't for me in the end. Let's go on to other books that I did indeed finish. This is After the Silence by Louise O'Neill. I think this is my favourite book by her so far. I definitely enjoy her books that she's written for adults more than her YA, though I have enjoyed that too. So my second favourite of hers is called Almost Love. This is set on a small island off the coast of Ireland, and it is about a documentary crew from Australia who have come to unearth this cold case. Nessa Crowley, who was a resident on the island, was either murdered or died 10 years previously. No one has been convicted of her murder. No one knows what happened on the lead up to her death, but they do know that there was a storm, which meant that if she was murdered, the suspect list is very limited, which is one of my favourite tropes in any mystery novel. And the locals are all convinced that Henry Kinsella is the person who murdered her. He is an Englishman living on this island, and he's married to Keelan, who is the person that we spend most of our time with in this book. I would say if you want a really good mystery novel, this is not a book that I would recommend specifically for that. Yes, it has mystery in it, but I don't think that's its strongest point. I think the thing that really shines in this book is the way that Louise writes about abusive relationships. So trigger warning for that in this book. Keelan has left her first husband, who was extremely physically abusive towards her, and now she's with Henry. And she presents herself at the beginning of this book as being in this amazing relationship now, and we really believe her because we're contrasting her relationship with Henry with the relationship that she's had in the past, where we can see how abusive this person was. But the more you get into this book, the more you realise it's really not healthy at all. So this is showing how abuse can not just be physical but also emotional, and you learn how much Henry controls everything that she does. So the mystery itself, yes, there were lots of intriguing parts of it. I did guess what the end was, and I wasn't frustrated that I had guessed that either. I didn't think it was really, really obvious or anything like that. But as I said, its strong point is the way that it talks about Keelan's relationship with Henry. And Louise is so good at writing characters who frustrate you as a reader. You can see, because you're on the outside, you're not trapped in their situation. You can see that they should be doing something other than what they're doing, and you know they're only going to hurt themselves by continuing on the path they're on, but equally you understand that they feel as though they can't make any other choice. She did that when she wrote Almost Love as well. She writes such complex female characters, and I love her for that. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, then definitely pick this one up. However, If a good mystery is number 1 on your list of criteria, then I have to recommend House of Correction by Nicci French. It has been, I'm not sure how long, since I have needed to stay up to finish a book. So I read most of this in one day, and I stayed up until 1:30 in the morning finishing this book because I needed to know what had happened. I have loved many of Nicci French's novels before. They are a husband and wife writing team. I haven't loved all of their books, but I've loved a lot of them, and I'm often asked where I recommend heading to once finishing the Frida Klein series, which is a series that they write. I would wholeheartedly recommend going to House of Correction. So this is about a woman called Tabitha, and we're introduced to her in jail. She has been arrested for the murder of Simon Rees, who was found dead in her garden shed. The problem is Tabitha doesn't think she did it, but she can't remember, and she really just wants to uncover the truth. She wants to represent herself in court, which the system is furious with her about. So she is investigating from within jail, and she calls people to come and see her in the visiting room so that she can try and work out what was happening. And there are things that you don't know about her that get revealed as the novel goes on. I thought the pacing was brilliant. I thought that the ending was extremely satisfying. And I also really appreciate the way that Nicci French talks about mental health. They discuss it in many of their books in quite a nuanced way, especially for the genre that they're writing in. And you don't see that often. So I really do appreciate that. Then I read a few books that I've spoken about in other videos, so I will speak about them quickly here. I read Taaqtumi, which is a collection of Arctic horror stories. Unfortunately, my favourite was the first one. That was the one that I think chilled me the most, but I did enjoy the other ones. It's not one of my favorites, but I'm very glad that I read it. I did some sample readings of this in a Halloween video that I filmed, which I'll link in the description box down below. I also read this, which is Weird Woods, Tales from the Haunted Forests of Britain, edited by John Miller, and this one was a little bit of a disappointment for me. I was really hoping that I would be scared by the stories in here, but they were just a little bit twee. So if you're looking for horror stories in the vein of Persephone books, who I love Persephone books, but I go to them for coziness rather than scariness. So if you would like scary stories that don't make you jump out of your skin and are very charming and old-fashioned, then this may be the one for you, but it wasn't quite what I wanted in that moment. And I also read Summerwater by Sarah Moss, which I've spoken about in another video, which I'll link in the description box down below. I am biased because I know Sarah, but I know her because of her writing. I didn't know her before that. We've just met at various literature festivals, and we've recorded a podcast together, which I'll link in the description box down below. But her writing just brings me such joy. She is able to write about really hard-hitting things and then be funny on the next page, and for that not to feel strange. This is set on an island in the middle of a loch. It's about a series of families who are staying in holiday homes, and they're all peering out of their windows and judging each other. If you've read her book Ghost Wall, this feels like an extension thematically of that, because it is about being on the outside of a situation. It is about xenophobia. It's about the way that parents can make their children believe in their ideology. I suppose all parents do that to some extent, but the consequences of that, I think, is what I mean. And even though, as I said, it's really funny in places, it's also heartbreaking, deals with some really serious issues, and has at its core this really threatening presence that haunts the whole book, and then it comes to this climax at the end, and it's brilliant. It amazes me how she can do so much in such a short space. Next, I read this book, which was sent to me from Faber. This is Gender Swapped Fairy Tales by Carrie Fransman and Jonathan Plackett. I love the premise of this book. So it's a husband and wife duo who decided to present the reader with 12 fairy tales. They have not rewritten them. Instead, they created a computer algorithm to change the fairy tales for them. And what they wanted to do was switch the gender of each character to highlight stereotypes within fairy tales and sexist language. And what I appreciated in the introduction of this book is a discussion on that term of swapping gender and highlighting that it's not to imply that that's a binary. Can you hear the birds outside? not to imply that it's a binary, and not wanting to erase trans voices either. I thought that was a necessary discussion when presenting something like this. I loved the illustrations in here, and I really wish that there had been more of them. This is one for Red Riding Hood. I think this is such a wonderful idea, but there were some things in this book that confused me and seemed to contradict what they had set out to do. So the reason that they had used a computer algorithm to change the language was because they didn't want their own unconscious bias to influence the stories, but then they tweaked them afterwards to make sure that everything made sense. There were just some decisions that, as I said, did not make sense to me. For instance, in this we have Rapunzel. So Rapunzel is a man who's locked in a tower, and he should be growing his hair really long and letting it out the window for a princess to climb up it. But because he's a man, they've changed it from him growing long hair to him growing a long beard. And to me, that is a very conscious decision to make him more masculine. And if the point is to highlight stereotypes and things within fairy tales related to gender, that changes the story entirely. I have a whole playlist on this channel on the history of fairy tales. It is my pet subject, which I'll link in the description box down below. For instance, in The Little Mermaid, in Hans Christian Andersen's version, the Little Mermaid sisters all cut off their hair as the ultimate sacrifice of their femininity. If you're going to be writing about fairy tales and showing what's valued when it comes to femininity, and that's hair, to then switch it to a beard because he's a man, as I said, does not make sense to me. Also in this book, you can find Sleeping Beauty and Beauty and the Beast, but they've renamed them Sleeping Handsome and Handsome and the Beast. And again, I didn't understand that, because if you're commenting on gendered language, why would you change that name? Why not call him Beauty? And then we can have a conversation about why men are rarely called beautiful. Handsome, to me, has a different meaning to beautiful, and that seems to be, for me, the point. So I would have liked that to have been kept. So those were the things that confused me about it. I did enjoy the book. I thought the illustrations were beautiful, and I also really liked the way that the authors talked about themselves as if they were following in the footsteps of Andrew Lang and his wife, who wrote his series of fairy tale books. Yeah, I enjoyed all of that. There were just some things about it that I didn't quite understand. I read 5 poetry collections last month. Sykkel Saga by Vicki Husband I spoke about in a video already, which I'll link in the description box down below. This is about a cycling expedition in the Arctic Circle. The next one I read was Dunce by Mary Ruefle. I really enjoy the playfulness and self-awareness and mockingness of some of her poems, such as this one, which is called Earthly Failure, which says, "The copier grew tired of copying, made a terrible sick sound and died. I told my friends the poem was blurry because the copier wept while reading it. That poem ruined the world, it made everyone shy. Now I've ruined the poem, there's nothing left but a knight sticking his sword in a snail." Unhistorical by Cavallaro is about Edinburgh and about love in your 20s, and then half of this collection is also about Sherlock Holmes. So quite a mixed bag, but not surprising if you've read some of Brie's work before. She loves fairy tales, but she's also obsessed with Sherlock Holmes, and she's written a YA series setting Sherlock Holmes in the present day with some of his descendants, which is really fun. I enjoyed reading that one. I read How to Wash a Heart by Bhanu Kapil. I think this was it my favourite? I'm not sure. It was one of my favourites of the poetry collections that I read last month. It's about xenophobia and racism, trying to find a home both within yourself and also within the surroundings. So a body as in your own, but the body of a house, and how you can be made to feel unwelcome both in somebody's house and within your own body too. The language inside here is just brilliant. And the last poetry collection I read was Lessons on Expulsion by Erika L. Sanchez. This is about family and love, and it's about Mexican culture. One of the poems says, "The glittering women swing their hips like eternal bells. The costumes are small eruptions, fabrics twisted and impossibly stitched, a geisha bride, a cowgirl princess. Beneath the unforgiving lights, the synthetic yellow wigs startle the brown clay of skin." There's a lot of affection within these poems. There's also a lot of discussion on power play and the abuse of power. Towards the end of the collection, she lost me a little bit. She was using language that I didn't I didn't particularly understand the choice that she was making in the language that she was using. So she used the R word in at least one poem, and seemed to be commenting on the oppression of women, specifically Mexican women, by using ableist language, that use of disability as a metaphor for talking about something else, which I really didn't get on board with. So there were some poems in here that I liked, but it lost me towards the end. I then read Backlight by Kanji Hanawa. This is published by Red Circle, and they publish really, really short books, Japanese writing translated into English for the first time. This is translated from the Japanese by Richard Nathan, and it's about a boy who goes missing in a forest. His parents kicked him out of the car because he was misbehaving, and they drove off as a form of punishment, and then as soon as they came back, which they did so really quickly, he had gone. This is a real thing that happened, and this is a short story about that, the search for him, and how it relates to fairy tale and why the story became such a sensation. It was in all of the national newspapers, and this is slightly perplexing to the Japanese people who are investigating this. So they're talking about how they think the European press is really interested in this because it feeds into folklore. It's very much like Hansel and Gretel fairy tale, children getting lost in a forest, which is tied up with European history. It doesn't so much tie in with Japanese folklore. I do think because it's so slight, it doesn't get as deep as I really would have liked it to, and maybe because I already know a lot about folklore and fairy tale, and was aware of this particular incident because of its relation to Hansel and Gretel at the time, that maybe I didn't get as much from this as someone who had never heard about any of those things and came to this text, but I still enjoyed it. I then read The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa, which is translated from Japanese by Stephen Snyder. This is a novel, and this, I hesitate slightly to say this because it does sound like quite a mean thing to say about a book that someone's worked really hard on, but I really wish this had been a short story. I didn't think that it needed to be a novel, but the premise of this is fascinating, and had it been condensed into a short story, I'm sure I would have absolutely loved it. This is a novel about an island where things go missing. Not just go missing and you can't find them, go missing and you've forgotten that they've even existed. And I think it's just that element of magical realism is hard to sustain for a really long period of time. It's interesting because it's an inversion of her novel The Housekeeper and the Professor, in that the norm in that novel is that everyone remembers everything apart from one person, whereas in this book everyone forgets things apart from a couple of people, and they are people who are hunted down in society because they are the people who are deemed by the government to be strange. It is, or at least feels like, a commentary on Nazi Germany and people hiding those who are hunted by the government in their attics and their basements. I thought that was very interesting. But as I said, even though the language in parts was fascinating and the premise overall is really intriguing, it didn't feel as though it could be sustained for an entire novel. It felt like it lagged in a lot of places. I found myself wanting to skim, which is unfortunate. This was our Patreon book club pick, so if you would like my in-depth thoughts on this, I made a whole video, which I'll link in the description box down below. My camera is flashing at me, so let me quickly finish up. I read The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. I think this is my favourite novel of hers that I've read, though my favourite piece she's ever written is still The Lottery. This is about a house that is haunted, and a man has collected a few people to come and stay at the house to see whether or not this haunting is true. He's brought together skeptics, but people who also believe in ghosts. It did scare me. There were parts in it that were very, very creepy. Strangely, it reminded me a little bit, and maybe other people won't think this, maybe this is just me, but it reminded me a little bit of Red, White and Royal Blue. Obviously, it would have to be the other way around because that came decades afterwards, but the discussion, the banter between the characters felt very much like that, made me smile. And there are hints of queerness in it as well, though of course not as much as I would have loved. I did feel as though the ending wasn't as satisfying as I would have liked it to been, and it was quite predictable in places. But as a scary book to read on Halloween, which is when I read it, I appreciated that. I also read 100 Shadows by Hwang Jungeun, which is translated from the Korean by Jungeun. This reminded me quite a bit of Human Acts by Han Kang, which I think overall I preferred more, but the images in here were really striking. It's just, that was few and far between. It's set in Seoul in an electrics market. It's about the slum, the people who live in there, and how they feel so downtrodden by society that there are parts of themselves that want to break free, run away, cause an uprising. It's about how their shadows call to them, telling their bodies to move away, to save themselves. And there is a Peter Pan element to that, you know, the self-preservation, tearing yourself away from the horrors of life, and taking you to a safe space. And I really enjoyed that discussion of layers of self. There's a lot of imagery to do with Russian dolls, and you're being trapped within yourself, but not only within your own body and your own situation, but within the bigger body of society, and how there are people above you that contain you and keep you in this one space and make it hard for you to change anything. And then finally, I read a few picture books. I read The Wolf's Secret, which I spoke about in another video, which is the most beautiful autumnal book. I will insert some cutaways so that you can see it. This is about folklore and about a friendship with a wolf. It is delightful. And then the final two books, I read Gobble You Up by Jita Wolf. This is published by Tara Books, who are an Indian publisher. I'm going to speak about them more in my Christmas gift guide because I love what they do. This is handmade. This is a fairy tale you can find in many different cultures around the world about an animal who tricks other animals into his stomach until, well, I don't want to ruin the ending, until something happens. I think I much preferred the illustrations in this to the text itself. Actually, it's going to be hard to hold up. I will do a cutaway so you can see the amazing prints inside it. I just think the art style is fantastic. And then the final book that I read is The Midnight Fair. This is a silent picture book. Silent picture books are amazing for children who are learning to tell their own stories, and also when you are learning a new language as well. And I have a video that I made a while ago all about silent picture books and graphic novels and why they're so great. I'll link that down below. This is a midnight fair, and whenever the humans go home, the local animals come and have fun at the fair instead. This is by Gideon Sterra, which is illustrated by Marichara Di Giorgio. I will insert a cutaway here so that you can see some of the inside spreads. I had such fun reading this book. It felt like a balm for the world at the moment. I don't know why I loved it so much. Maybe it was just, I was going to say maybe it was just the right time and the right place, but that does a disservice to the book. It's because the book is brilliant too. But you know, just when you find a particular book at a particular time and it just makes it all the more enjoyable, I think this was one of those times. So those are all the books that I read last month. Having spoken about them, maybe it was more not so great than great, but I did read some books that I really enjoyed. I will list all of these titles in the description box down below. Let me know what you have been reading recently, because I would love to know. I hope you're all doing okay, and I will speak to you very soon. Lots of love. Bye.